Hello, everyone, and thanks for checking out the Indy Handshake Wrestling Podcast. I am overjoyed today to bring one of my favorites from the NorCal and beyond independent scene from the early 2000s, Mr. Tom Carter, also known as Reckless Youth.
Hello. Thanks for having me on today. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to where the conversation goes today.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you on. I remember when I first started discovering independent wrestling, I would go to shows like Big Time Wrestling and other ones in Northern California because that's where I live. And then you were one of the wrestlers I immediately gravitated towards as a fan because of the reckless style. Hate to do that to you, but it was a lot. You had a lot of skill, actually in wrestling, but also doing high flying moves. Everything. You kind of had a big melding style, which I think was kind of before its time. What would you say to that?
So, I know I was given a lot of credit, or have been given a lot of credit for ushering in a new style, but I felt like all I was really doing is just like copying like the New Japan Junior style. I felt like that's what I was doing, but in all fairness, I wasn't really trying to be Jushin Liger or anybody like that. There were a handful of guys right in that transitionary period when I was coming out of being a wrestling fan into an actual wrestler and trying to figure out my niche, because at the time I was like super small. I was like 165 pounds, soaking wet, 5'10", butt white, not really no real muscle at all. And at the time when I was coming up, 95 was when I first started to actually be on shows, but I was training sometime before then. So the wrestling was a lot different by that time. But anyway, the point is there's a number of wrestlers that I was big on at the time, and I was trying to take elements of all of them together and really kind of and I think that's all I was really doing. I was just taking a piece or pieces of people that I loved, like Regal, absolutely loved Regal, Ultimo Dragon, Dean Malenko, Kurt Hennig, Great Muta, right? Like there was all these different influences. And funny as it may sound, most people would know Raven, right? But I was a fan of his work when he used to wrestle as Scotty the Body. And so this just showing my age, right? And so there were things and elements, I was really big on movements in the ring, and how things connected into moves. And so I would look at small little movements like that about guys and just the way they would carry themselves in the ring. A lot of the guys I named, guys with little to no wasted movement. And so I really tried to adopt those type of things. And at the time I was just doing stuff. I was small and I was just doing stuff that, maybe guys weren't doing, or it just, along with the character and my willingness to travel everywhere for $2, it just caught on, and I mean I'm super thankful for it. It was a cool experience overall, and I think I get a lot more credit than I actually deserve, to be honest. Because as an example, they say Reckless Youth, right? And right away it came to mind I do all these moves, these high flying moves. And I didn't do that many. Mm-hmm. And I was really big. Probably if you ever look back on stuff, I was really big on defensive wrestling. So the counters and reversals and all this, what I would call is the dance. Before I would actually do a move or leading up to a move. And I was really big on those type of things. And then the character in and of itself. So the Reckless Youth had a lot to do about that anti-establishment, against authority, any type of authority figure. That was the character too. And yeah, I was just trying to get away from the Reckless Youth moniker. That name, the expectation or the hope was that when I was in developmental, that I would have been, I would have received some new gimmick, and I would have been able to step away from the Reckless Youth character, because I was getting old, so I was getting a little too old to use reckless youth. But it seems I couldn't shake it. And so when I came out of developmental, not long after I came out of developmental, I got injured really bad. And I had a really bad fall working a match with Jimmy Rave in Florida for the NWA. I can't remember. It was some type of tournament. I can't remember if it was like the junior heavyweight, light heavyweight, or was it a heavyweight tournament? I can't remember which one it is. I know you guys search through stuff out there. I know there's video out there, but I went to do a move out to the floor, and Rave stepped out of the way, and I hit the floor, and I was like paralyzed for, probably 10 seconds, and it felt like 10 years.
Wow.
And I was out for a good year and a half. I didn't think I was going to wrestle again, and that was right around the time where I opened Chikara along with Mike Quackenbush. And when I went up doing that, I started, working out a little bit more with the guys, doing some more things, keeping it pretty simple. Got in shape during that time as well, and then tried to come back after that time, like rebranding myself, stepping away from the reckless youth character and into that Tom Carter character. Well, it was the technician, and that was Gabe's idea from Ring of Honor. And I was starting a program in Ring of Honor where they were doing the pure division, and I was going to be involved pretty heavily in that. Some things shifted around, didn't wind up working out, and I think by 2003 I was pretty much done with like active competition. I came back here and there, and I did some things like in 2006, 2007, and one or two things here and there after that, but was pretty much done. But yeah, so this is a long story. Sorry about that.
Oh, no.
But that technician, yeah, it was a way for me to move away from reckless youth, especially because a lot of the guys, a lot of boys in the back, like, used to make fun of me all the time because I was definitely not a youth anymore.
Well, that's the problem.
And I was not reckless either.
That's the problem that the young bucks have now in AEW. Everyone's like the middle-aged bucks is what they call them.
There you go. Yeah. There you go.
I will say you definitely had one of the cleanest and best frog splashes.
So, it's funny about that. So I obviously did not invent the frog splash, right? That's pretty clear, right? I didn't invent the frog splash. It's funny because I don't remember the pay-per-view, but I remember seeing Art Barr do it, right? And so it was this pay-per-view. I think it was filmed in California, right? And Art Barr did the frog splash. And this was like back in the day, VHS tapes, I think, or something like that. And like if you didn't catch it, or you didn't have it, like you don't remember it. And I had imagined it differently. So I was trying to recreate this frog splash, and I didn't even realize I wasn't even doing his frog splash until a number of years later. Eddie Guerrero started to do it as a tribute to Art Barr, and I was like, "That's not the frog splash."
Yeah.
And people were like, "It looks just like a frog," and I was like, "Well, then what do I do?" And they were like, "Well, we call it a frog splash, but you just split legs thing and or whatever," and so, yeah, I didn't realize I wasn't doing the frog splash.
At the risk of possibly outing someone, did D'Lo Brown see your frog splash before he started doing his?
So, I don't know if you guys know, but D'Lo and I grew up together.
Okay.
Yeah, so D'Lo and I grew up together. It's just a crazy set of circumstances. We were backyard wrestlers, and then we used to rent the ring together, and along with a group of other guys, and it kind of just transitioned into this opportunity. We went to high school together, and we were on the wrestling team. He was really good. D'Lo was really, really good, and I was not. I would go and try to do like the moves you saw on TV in like amateur wrestling, and then, like, I would always get in trouble, like DDTing people, try to give them neck breakers and stuff like that. We wound up like having like this backyard club together, And it happened that one of the people in the club was like, "Do you know there's a wrestling school right near where I live?" And so what we did is we kind of took our wrestling club. I contacted, it was Larry Sharp's Monster Factory, and I contacted Larry Sharp and I said, "Hey, I got a group of my guys. Like, there's like 10 to 15 of us, and we'd love to just rent your ring for a couple hours and kind of like film a little show." And he thought it was the most ridiculous thing in the world. And he was laughing, and he was like, "Sure, I'll charge you $100 an hour," right? And so like every month, every 2 months at the most, we would come in and we would pay several $100s. We would pony up the money, and we would rent this ring to get in this ring. And after a few years of doing that, and like what would happen is we would do it like on a Saturday afternoon, and the wrestling school was training people up until early afternoon. And so we would come in to kind of do one of our shows, and it was just for ourselves. And a lot of the wrestlers would stay behind. Some of the workers would stay behind, some of the trainers. And after a little while of seeing us at like all the time, they would start getting in the ring with us, and they would start showing us some things. And most of the time they weren't being nice. They were just kind of like, "This is what you guys get wrong," or "You don't know how to do this," or "This is how you're supposed to do that." And they would beat us up sometimes and everything, stretch us. And that's kind of how we like slowly creeped into the business. And, but D'Lo and I, we were really close. We stayed close. He wound up, connecting with some people who went down to Smokey, but we maintained a relationship. And he was so much bigger than me, all this stuff. And he was in a good place, right people, knowing the right things. And he had the opportunity with the Fed. And when he had the opportunity with Fed, like so many guys, like, they're always taking something from somebody else in order to be over, right? Or to stay over and stuff. And and you see something, like most of the stuff that I did, I took from somebody else, right? And so like somebody wasn't doing it in the territory I was in, or whatever, like that kind of thing. And I would do it. And so, yeah, like I was doing a number of different things that he picked up, but he had his own things too. But yeah, that frog splash was something. So it's cool. Like if I ever saw like a video game, or if I saw him on it, I would laugh. I would laugh because there would be a bunch of people. Like I was a big Fire Pro Wrestling fan. If you ever heard of that game,
yeah, absolutely.
And I would laugh because some of the moves that I created or invented, other people would do, right? And I would see it on the game, and I was like, "That's the coolest thing." Like I understand that, and I met him, a number of years later. Alex Shelley was a fan of mine, and so he did some of my moves. So one of my moves, the cross-legged Northern Lights bomb, he wound up doing, and it was on the game. And I'm like, "Oh, that's so cool," right? So like sometimes when other people, they say imitation is the greatest form of flattery. So me seeing other people do those moves, some of my moves was cool. I would get a bigger kick, not necessarily of the moves, but when I would see people do spots that I did. And I was like, "Oh man, that would be cool." And I'd see other people do like, my spots, right? I thought that was really cool. So, but yeah, so D'Lo, yeah, I was doing that split leg frog splash. And again, it wasn't even intentional. I didn't even realize I wasn't doing it right.
Yeah, I always thought like it was such an interesting way to do it, and it just looked so flashy because like to have the legs whip out that way and then snap back right before you land is, I don't know, just the way it looks is great. D'Lo is, I've noticed now recently on YouTube and stuff, a lot of people are they make videos of like unsung heroes of the Attitude Era and stuff like that, and a lot of people are putting like D'Lo on there. D'Lo is very entertaining. He is such a good promo.
Oh, yeah.
So like,
oh yeah.
And he like was great in the ring, and it was just crazy. Like you think about it, like guys that like helped carry the Attitude Era, and like you don't really name him, but like he was a huge part of it.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think he was the first ever Intercontinental and European champion, like a dual champion, like one of those one. I think it was the first ever dual, like held them at the same time. I can't remember, but yeah, it was funny because we had similar upbringing. So to see him go on, right? It's just so few make it to the top. And I mean, there are just thousands of incredible people, right? And their spots are so few. And to see him make it, it was really, really cool to see him make it. And so even if he did something that I did, I used to do this. I never even knew what I called it, and I kind of did it by accident, but I did this front face thing where I smack them down on their face. I didn't even know what to call it. And he started doing that. And then next thing I started seeing everybody do it. And I thought that was cool. Right. And so, it was always neat because then like, I almost felt like if he was performing, like a piece of me was actually performing with him. And he did some pretty awesome venues and wrestled some of like my heroes. So, that I didn't get a chance to wrestle. So, it was a huge, mark for, Waltman. And he just had a stellar series with Waltman. And so like, it was almost, for me, it was like, oh, I'm there. I'm actually working Waltman, like right to some degree. So, that was really neat. So
that's a great attitude to have. I really like that. As opposed to like some people who, might get bitter or might get angry. I'm curious, do you think, especially because you were talking about, starting off in like 95, 96 and then on, when it really was like, you mentioned being small, it really was like a body thing at the time. Like if you weren't 6 foot something, jacked and tanned, you weren't really going to be able to do anything. Right.
No, I didn't wear hot stuff and they would look at me like, what, like I'm too skinny, I'm too small. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but no. Yeah, like I didn't even fit any of the molds at the time. And I want to be fair. There were a lot of small guys before me, right? And, there were a lot of small guys before me, and around the time when I was there, right? But you're right. It was like just everywhere, whether it be the indies, whether it be the big shows, like it was all about the big monsters. And so it was a lot different. Like when I came in, it was just a totally different approach. So I'm sorry I cut you off on that.
No, even like in WCW when they had, smaller guys wrestling, like even then, like you hear nowadays, you hear about like backstage, that'd be like, oh, it's the cruiserweights. Like they all like dismiss them like, oh, so like Jericho like fighted, like he really wanted to not be in the cruiserweight division because he was just like, and he's like, I'm 6 foot tall. What the hell? But how do you think your career would have been different, let's say, if it started 10 years later, if you were 10 years younger at the time?
So what do you mean if I started in like the 2000s or mid 2000s?
Yeah, if you were like hitting your peak, like in the 2000s, like in the mid 2000s or so, with the kind of, especially the indie boom. I really see you actually are in a great spot as far as like, so the micro indie boom, as I call it, in the early 2000s, where it was like indies are big, but they're not gigantic yet. And then there was a huge lull. And then all of a sudden, Ring of Honor, everything, boom, indies are back, right? So you kind of went through all of that. What would you think? Like I said, if you were younger, when the boom started happening.
So, boy, that's a really interesting question to ask. And the reason I say it is because I think if that foundation wasn't laid in the mid to late 90s, what you would have, I feel what you saw in the, early to mid to late 2000s, even what you see going on in the Fed over the years with even just the size of the guys and the style shift and change, that wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for that mid to late 90s, that path that was being blazed there. Like that was the foundation, in my opinion, for everything that came after that, right? So when I came in, small guys were relegated to the opening match or getting just pummeled by like a huge guy, right? They might have an underdog gimmick, and that's not to say there weren't breakouts here and there, but it was usually relegated to an underdog gimmick. And like during that time, there were a lot of things that were at play. Like the internet was exploding and everything too. That really contributed to some steam behind me, giving me a lot more credit than I actually deserved on a lot of things. But next thing you know, like it was unheard of for a guy that looked like me, performed like me, to main event a show. And so that transition happened all during that time. And there were just a lot of things that were, man, it was just so many things. But for me, I look at it like the foundation was built there, for what paved the way to even potentially where we are right now. Not really too connected to wrestling in general. Sadly, a long time ago, somebody told me once you get in it, it's like a magician. Once you learn the tricks, right, then you're just watching to learn the person's sleight of hand, how they did the trick, and you can't appreciate it like you used to. So it's hard to look at something with fan eyes anymore. So unfortunately, over the years, just not really too connected to wrestling to really be able to say a lot of what's going on really right now. I just hear whispers or things here and there about people in different places. But I think, a lot of that foundation that was built in the mid to late 90s, even arguably some of the earlier 90s too, is what created that atmosphere. So that availability, those possibilities in the 2000s and on. So I don't really know what I could have been or where I could have been or what it would have even looked like if I started 10 years later, right? If I started 10 years later and I was, 10 years younger, I don't really know.
Well, you mentioned
I don't know it would be there.
The base of and then you became the technician later on and stuff like that. Chances are it's easy to say, oh, maybe 10 years later your career would have been flourished even further, but also 10 years later, maybe because of the industry being so friendly towards high flying or spot monkeys, as you would call them, maybe you wouldn't have learned any of that technician stuff and you would have just been like, oh, okay, I'll just do these things then. So who knows? Anything could have happened.
I don't even think, that's even to say I don't know if there would have even been the place for the lighter weight guys. Mm-hmm. I think it would have been probably starting the same. So I was just in this crazy place too, where the internet had just boomed. It was just a lot different. It was just so much different at the time. And, again, I just don't know, cause what you do is you're taking it and you're just going, hey, Ring of Honor starting in the early 2000s, right?
Yeah.
I think that was built on a lot of things that got to that place, right?
Yeah.
Even the smaller guys being looked at and being used, and even to this day, being used and not even people thinking about it, right? That foundation was built in those early, in the 90s, that foundation was built. So, for me to even come in at that later point, there was just so many just different factors. It was like a perfect storm at that time. And, the business was high. WWF was doing well. WCW was doing well at the time. ECW was drawing and the indies were just exploding, right? I wouldn't have had the access to opportunity I had to travel to where I traveled, but for the fact that I would go out there to California big time, and he would have big shows. He would have big shows. He'd have big names, and he would draw. And that was just at a time. Now, I don't know if that continued, but I know in the early 2000s, after I came back from my developmental, I saw things drop significantly, but that was right around WCW folding, being picked up by WWE. I think that was probably the worst thing ever to happen for wrestling, in my opinion. But just the lack of competition, I think it hurt everybody everywhere. And I think the biggest losers out of all of that, obviously there were a lot of workers that got impacted negatively. A lot of friends that I knew got impacted negatively, but really it hurt the fans the most. And I think, the business still might be struggling, from a fan perspective, not being as big as, I can remember easily you could go places and pick up WWF paraphernalia, right? But they would have WCW. Business was so high at the time that they would have those Sting stuffed animal, stuffed thingies, pillow stuffed thingies. WCW was going crazy. The Monday Night Wars, all that stuff was just, the business was so good, and it just trickled into the independents. I would do shows in Texas. They would draw 5,000 in these rodeo arenas. And like, it's just, the business was just up at the time, and it was great. And then there was just so much talent. And because of the internet, there was just an exposure to talent that people wouldn't otherwise see. I mean, now, like, fast forward, you got YouTube and all these other things, and so many people doing everything under the sun, everything imaginable, right? Like, I only saw those moves in video games when I was coming up, and now people are actually doing those moves.
Yeah.
Like a double moonsault. Whoever even would think you could do something like that, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, just insane.
So let's go back to doing the backyard stuff. So when does the transition come into full on becoming a pro wrestler from doing backyard stuff?
So I was like backyarding, I think, into like 93, 94, some point around there. So like when I was coming up, in the Northeast, the business was difficult to get into for a lot of different reasons. There was the athletic commissions in the various states, and so like not everybody could run a show. And once there was the decommissioning, then you saw the explosion of schools and of shows all over the place. But before that, in New Jersey, there were only a few promotions you could wrestle for, and it had to be known that you trained at one of these places and you were in good standing with one of these people to even be able to work another show, right? So there weren't too many things going on, and so I was backyarding with some friends. We were all given the opportunity to sell X amount of tickets, and we could get on the show. And that at the same time, we had to join the school. And so that happened for me in late 94, early 95. I think my first match was February 1995. But unofficially, I had probably been training for 2 years at least leading up to that. I was doing the backyarding with my friends, but the workers at the Monster Factory would allow us and ask us to come on training nights, and they would just use us as test dummies for everything. And while they were doing that, they were showing us how to do things. And so like we were learning different things, right? Not just getting beat up, right? We were learning things, we were earning respect. And so this was like a longer process to do everything. There was another, so we would kind of sneak into Sharps and work out with the guys like Glenn Ruth, probably my first trainer, Glenn the Spider Ruth, who later went on to be Headbanger Thrasher. There was Mosh and Thrasher. Thrasher was the one that trained me and D'Lo, a bunch of us, and probably first was working with him, and then we stepped sideways, and we were trying to sneak into the business, right? We were trying to sneak into the business, and we knew enough to know that you had to have like tights and boots. We, got some old used boots, and Dick Worley, he used to be a referee. He had a school that was nearby in Voorhees, New Jersey, and we went over and trained over there. And guys from Eastern Championship Wrestling, Tri-State Wrestling Alliance, like that, like the Joel Goodhart guys from the late 80s, early 90s. Those guys would come over to Worley School and work out. So I would work out with like Ted Petty. And it was just like, it was Cheetah Kid. Like I was like, that's Cheetah Kid, right? And this was before he was like Rocco Rock or anything like that. And everybody's like, it was Ted Petty. And I was like, I got to like work out with like Ted Petty, And so like that was great. And but then we came back to Sharps and got the offer to start training at Sharps and doing shows. I did a couple shows for Sharp. We got in a disagreement about money. It hurt me because then it kind of blackballed me or blacklisted me from being able to work anywhere in the area in the Northeast. And at the time, D'Lo had left. There was a big story, like part of the blackballing was because of D'Lo had issues too, right? and he had gone down to Smokey. Smokey folded by this time, and he went up to stay with Al Snow. And so this is like mid 90s, and Beeler's like, you can come and stay at Snow's. I'm really close with them. I'm helping out with the training, and you can come here. And so what I would do is I would travel out there, and I would stay like a week. And so I would come back every 4 or 6 weeks, and I would stay for like a week. And so Al Snow had rotating classes, and I would go there, and I was getting like trained by Al, and I was allowed to be there. But what I had to do is I had enough experience that any of his new guys, I had to carry them in their first matches, like in that area. And so I was putting guys over in, around there so I could stay there and work out. And Al was just great. Like, Al blew my mind. Like, I went to Al's, and like, as much as I thought I knew, right, how to do everything, Al is the one that exposed me, and like through like Machine Gun Mike Kelly up in that territory and all that, exposed me to Japanese wrestling. And so I knew how to do like one reversal for, one thing or another. And Al showed me like 5 different ways to reverse something. And I'm like, what is this? Like, I felt like I was like, I knew nothing, right? Like being around Al. And so like I was able to get free training and put over these guys. And then I'm learning, and I'm just learning, and we're watching tapes, and we're going in the ring, and Al had like a crash pad to practice. Like, that's how I even started doing some of the flipping around. And next thing you know, like, I was doing shows out there and the sheet writers were writing about this guy. And like, so when you first start, this is showing my age. When you first started in the beginning, you couldn't really have a gimmick. It was like you were just yourself, you were really playing, and then they would see after time what your gimmick was. Well, because I was blackballed as Tom Carter, I couldn't be Tom Carter out there. And so I was able to be this reckless youth character that was, all these circumstances that led to the reckless youth character. But I was able to be reckless youth out there. So they didn't know that I was Tom Carter out there doing reckless youth, because all the sheet writers, it was kind of before all the, internet like that, like, with videos and everything. And next thing you know, I'm working out there all the time, and it was a great ride out there. And next thing you know, promoters were calling me to see if I would come to the East Coast. I was like, I live an hour away. I'll do the show. I'll do the show. It was a little difficult when I came back to the East Coast because I was still in trouble with Sharp, and then that finally got smoothed over. And I was allowed to work for a lot of like the Jersey, PA, Delaware, even some areas in New York. So the business was a lot different then, and all. So, but if it wasn't for me going out there in the 90s, and in the mid to late 95 is when I was like working all the time out there, and then that gave me an opportunity to come back late 95, early 96. And then I was doing 2 territories. So I would work the Northeast, and then I was working the Midwest. And so by 96, through 96 through 97, I was juggling territories. And then that just opened the door for other territories, like going down south, going further out west. And I was a huge fan of Waltman. And before he went to WWF as 123 Kid, I keep saying WWF, I'm showing my age too. He worked a bunch of different indies, and I used to open up the magazines, and I think it was like the Wrestler or All Star Wrestling. They used to have the rankings from all the different indies and stuff, along the big companies and all the different indies. And you would see Waltman in just about every company around the country. And I remember being like, I want to be like him. And so that was my big motivation to go everywhere for $2, and just get on a show. And I was like, if I can get on a show, there's a strong possibility I can get back on the show. But the hardest part was getting onto the show, and especially my size and all that stuff. It was hard to just get onto a show. But once I got on the show, I was usually asked back and all. So, and so that's kind of how it grew from there.
And how would you compare the crowds in the different territories? And did you find you had to work any style that was different? Did you find that you had to play a certain attitude to the crowd? Like how did they respond differently?
When I was coming up, what I was doing was kind of so new that most of the time, it wasn't like I had to do anything different. I was just, the biggest thing was if somebody was doing something like me, or whoever I was paired with, however we could work out a good dance that would entertain the people, because we had to be conscious of where we were in the show. I mean, when I was first starting out, I would be opening match, or second match. So can't be an explosion on that, because then, like, if I'm undercutting the matches above me, well, then I'm definitely not getting called back, right? Definitely not getting asked back, and all. So that culture really shifted and changed later, right? And so I was just kind of doing things a lot different, and really, it was just so much different that it wasn't like I had to do things differently for people. Most of the time, I was just asked to slow down a little bit. I was moving a little too fast in some cases. And then over time, it became customary for that pace. And more people that I started working with were working that pace. And so then it became, just more adopted. And so, like, even the culture of the crowds, they would be like, okay, these are the big guys, and here comes the little guys. And the little guys are going to be a different speed than the big guys, and it's just going to work a little bit differently. But when I worked, I always tried to not just do flashy moves, but I always tried to do just funny things. Like I used to steal spots from the midget wrestlers all the time, and I would use them. So most of my comedy spots and things like that were all just taken from midget wrestlers. And so, like, if there were ever any midget wrestlers on the show, I wouldn't do any of their spots, like, out of respect, right? But most of my comedy was taken from them. And so I always tried to do, like, entertaining. Like, it wasn't just about the moves. It was also, I'd always try to make people laugh a little bit in the match. I was mostly a heel because I was going under, and my job was to make the baby face look good. And so I didn't have a problem with making myself look really, really stupid. And the more outlandish I would be, the more it actually got over. I took that cue from Rick Rude. Ravishing Rick Rude, probably one of that guy, I could live just on the way he sold things. And what's amazing about him, a lot of people don't know, he started out pretty early as a masked wrestler. So he had to learn how to sell with his body because he couldn't sell with his face. And once the mask came off, he sold with his body and his face.
Wow.
And his facial expressions were so outrageous, right? And so I would just, like, a lot of the stuff I would do, I would just model that. And so I was just a bunch of pieces of a bunch of different people that I loved.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I know you said you're out of tune with wrestling culture now, but there's actually a whole thing on wrestling Twitter where people post, like, compilations of Rick Rude selling atomic drops. It's like a big.
Were amazing.
Yeah.
And you could just do, like, for me, like you say, like, were regions different? Regions really weren't different for me to perform for. It depended on the demographics of the crowd. That was a big thing for me, right? So, and then over time, the culture of the business changed, where the fan became smarter and smarter and more demanding, right? And I don't mean to make that sound like in a bad way, right? But they just became more demanding, right? So, and just shifted, right? So, like, probably some of my best people that I like to perform in front of were kids. I love to do kid shows, and any time that I could do a benefit or something that was kid based, I loved making a fool out of myself in front of kids. I worked this one show. It was a Toys for Tots show, UWC in New Jersey, and I used to work that year after year. And I used to do the silliest stuff on those shows, and I didn't mind making myself look like a fool. I can remember doing a spot where the one guy, he brought in a blow-up thing, was like his manager. This guy Lupus, I think it was him. He brought in, like, a blow-up doll, and that was his manager. It was a girl blow-up doll. It was supposed to be his manager. It was supposed to be a kid show. And in the match, we were doing this like tag match or something like that. And I just think about these things that make me laugh. But towards the finish, he was laying down on the ground, and somebody pulled him out of the way and laid the blow up doll down, and I did the moonsault onto the blow up doll, and then I like real funny with my face, I hooked the leg and I'm like selling it really hard, and the kids are all laughing, and then like the ref's not counting, and I'm like acting like what's wrong, and I hold up the blow up doll, and the other worker like I'm looking at the blow up doll, and he super kicked threw the blow up doll onto me, and I fell down and had the blow up doll top me, and the ref counted 3, and like the kids ate that up, and like I was crying, and I love doing stuff like that, but I loved it as much as working like in front of like really smart fans where you had to work for everything, right? Like so like both of those dynamics were great and all, and the crowds were always just so interesting everywhere I went. The crowds weren't the challenge as much as it was sometimes with the workers. So like when I first went down south, I'm sorry, I'm just rambling.
Oh no, it's totally good.
So when I first went down south under developmental, it was really different for me, and they were still doing like kayfabe locker rooms and things like that. You like get the finish when you get in the ring, and in most cases they wouldn't even tell you the finish. It would just be like who's going over, and you would work it all in the ring, and that was very different for me. Like now, I would work with guys and because I had traveled so much, it's not like I would work with different guys a lot. And so I would meet them, an hour or a few hours before the match. It's not like we could really script, everybody had a certain amount of training so we could work through things. And, so it's not like I was doing like completely scripted matches at all. We would work a finish, maybe the beginning, the turnaround, and then we'd have all the filler. But Memphis or being down in that territory, I say Memphis, but being down in that territory, they didn't work like that. And so that was like a culture shock for me going down there and really trying to like just follow somebody else and listen to them and then be conscious of the crowd at the same time. So that was a neat learning experience. As much as I hated my time in developmental, there were good experiences that later I can reflect back on and say like, oh, that was cool. But at the time, I just did not want to be there. I hated being there. I didn't, and there were a lot of promises that didn't come through for who knows all the reasons. I'm sure I contributed to at least half of them. And, I just didn't want to be there, but it was kind of thing that later I appreciated a lot more later. But a lot of it I didn't like. And so that was a hard time on me, but like the time with Regal, when Regal came there, Regal was one of like my heroes. And, I don't know if you ever learned this, but so you're in the business, so, but like, when I was coming up, you always learn like you never mark out for one of the boys in the back. You never mark out. You run the risk of getting beat up if you mark out. And I'm little, so like they would definitely beat me up. And so, you run that risk, right? So you learn, you like never mark out, you never sell it or anything like that. You've been respectful, this, that, and the other thing. So I always learn that, right? But I was in Memphis, and I was in Memphis for a few months, and then Regal showed up. And Regal showed up the first night he showed up. I walked right up to him and I was like, my name's Tom Carter and I'd like you to teach me everything you know. I'm a huge fan. And he actually remembered me. He was like, I remember you when you came and did your first tryout at WWF. And I was like, what? It was at the time when I think he was the man's man or something. Yeah. The first time he came or whatever. And I was like, I couldn't believe he remembered me. And that turned out to be a great relationship and for the time that I was there. But yeah, there were, like I said, I can look back, there were a lot of good things, but at the time, I just didn't want to be there. I'm incredibly introverted. A lot of people don't believe it. I'm incredibly introverted. So I could perform, but usually the lead up to the performance and afterwards, I was like really, really drained. And a lot of people were just like, what's wrong with him? because like my character wasn't the real me. It was just a character. It's who I want it to be and who I'm not really. and
So I'm curious.
so like being there was tough.
Yeah, so I'm curious, how does that? We always like to also go into like the social aspect of wrestling. It's called the Indy Handshake for a reason. You gotta shake everyone's hand. You gotta go, blah blah. So as a person who's introverted, how is that when you're like, you show up, so you gotta say hello to everyone. You gotta like do all this. Like how does that like mentally?
Well, it's funny too because over the years, like I may have started to become known in like indie circles, but if I was ever anywhere around like a bigger person, like a bigger name person, they didn't know who's Reckless Youth, right? They didn't even care who I was, right? And so like you would always be respectful, right? And it's so funny, like you go up and do the handshake, and they'd be like, yeah. Like I'm just some guy that wants to be in their spot. And so you would always do those pleasantries, but most of the time those pleasantries, like they were just that, they were pleasantries, and most people really didn't acknowledge you or anything. If somebody was shepherding you around, that might have been a little different, right? So like D'Lo was, he got me into the company along with a few other people, right? Like it was a big push, and some circumstances, things changed. Terry Taylor was there for a minute at the time, and D'Lo was close with Terry. And Terry liked me. He came from WCW at the time. They had some smaller guys there. He knew about me through Pete Gruner, Billy Kidman, Kid Flash, like all the different names. And so he kind of knew me a little bit, had heard about me, and so that kind of worked in. But like so I'd say that because D'Lo would take me around the people he was close with, and he would be like, "Oh yeah, this is my friend Tommy," and depending on how much they, looked at him or whatever, they might be nice or whatever, right? So, but it was a lot different when I was being mentored by Regal had so much respect from everybody, and Regal would be like, this kid's good. He's one of my boys, and like Triple H would be like, I'm hearing really good things about you. You know what I mean? Benoit, like Jericho, all that. Like it was Regal, right? It was totally different, right? And I'm not, putting down D at all. It's just like it was just a different time, right? Like when D was introducing me to people, he was still kind of on the way up, establishing himself. Regal, this was later. He was so well established, people knew him. It was just different and all. But most of the time, most of the guys were pretty much to themselves, right? You're in like, it's so hard in the big show. It's so hard. You got to be at the building at like noon, and you don't start working until like the show doesn't start until 8.
Yeah.
I mean, these guys are like going crazy, and so like most of the time, like it was pretty quiet. You exchange your pleasantries, and most people are sleeping or trying to find ways to, spend their time. It wasn't really that big. Indies were a little bit different, but indies, depending where you were, you still had to show up early. It was difficult, just for some of those things, right? Like, just interacting with the different people. And that was the thing, like, it's easy to be introverted and people be like, oh, that person's a snob, or, oh, that person is stuck up. That person is a jerk. And it was just like, I wasn't really like, the character was just a character, and it was easy to hide behind that character because that wasn't the real me, right? It was easy to be this character that I thought I should be, or I wanted to be, but really wasn't. And so a lot of people would get accustomed to the character, right? And then they would see or meet me, and they would be like, what's the deal? What's wrong with this guy?
Yeah.
Why is he so quiet? Why is he so reserved? Why is he so held back? Why doesn't he want to talk to us? And then I would get in the ring, and I'd be real loud, crazy, and I'd do interviews, real, really, really loud, crazy. But yeah, most of the time it was really hard. So a lot of times those perceptions were difficult, and I think I got labeled, a few times different ways by different people, and that's tough, but there's not really much you can do about that and all. Especially if somebody gets an impression of you, it's hard to be like, no, I promise I'm really not like that.
Yeah.
it's hard to undo that, sometimes.
So going back to doing the developmental deal, so how does I kind of love going to the weird minutia of these things. Like, so you get a tryout. How does the tryout go? And then what do they say to you when you're actually going to be offered a deal? Like, what are some of the things that they're promising or saying, critiquing, any of that kind of stuff?
So I had a dark match or two. So I got asked up and had a dark match or two. I was one of the few guys at the time that didn't do, so some of the guys would go up, they would do like a dark match, or they would do job matches because they had like jobbers at that time, and they would do job matches. I think I was too small to do any of that, so it wouldn't have even mattered. But I would go up. I did a couple dark matches. I got asked to come up. Coronet was an advocate for me at one time, and he got me up there. I don't know all the circumstances around it, but he got me up there once or twice, and it really amounted to nothing. I came in, was introduced to a few people. I could tell that, like I definitely felt like, like they would just look at me and they would be like, number one, everybody was like this, looking down at me, right? And they would just once over me and be like, and like, I got a funny story. Like it was like Jim Ross. I was being introduced to Jim Ross, and he just totally blew me off. And how do I look marketable to him? Right? I didn't look marketable to him. I was smaller than him, right? So, I went up. I did a couple tryouts. It didn't materialize to anything. And man, I think it was like a year went by, and suddenly they started talking about these the training school in Stanford. And I can't even remember how I got asked to go up to the first one, but whatever it was, I got asked to go up to the first one, and I go up there. It was more or less overseen by Bruce Pritchard, and I'm trying to remember. Tom Pritchard was there training everybody. Both of the ones I went to, Tom Pritchard was there training, but the first one was Bruce Pritchard was overseeing it. The second one, Terry Taylor was overseeing it. So I went to the first one, and they did something with you that you had some type of no compete if you went up there for 3 months, I think it was, and because it was so tense at that time, and I never had a dream of working for the WWF, and I really didn't want to work for the WWF. I was actually trying to get a job with WCW because they had the smaller guys there, and I thought I had a better opportunity there. WWE was still like the land of the giants. Yeah. And I was like, the chance of me getting in there are slim. And if I get in there, all they're just going to do is destroy me. Turns out I got there, and they loved me talking. They just wanted me to be a manager. And I'm like, I want to be a worker. So I went and I did the first tryout, and Bruce Pritchard was just like, not going to happen. And so I just drove home, didn't think anything of it. And then right about like that cutoff time, like I said, there was some type of 3-month thing I think that you signed or something. Right around that, suddenly there was this transition, and D'Lo was doing really well. He's talking to Taylor. Taylor was there. Taylor knew about me. Taylor was somehow involved in it. Taylor called me up. I like you. Let's get you up here. I want to see you. I'm hearing really good things about you. I'm hearing about you from a few different people, from some of my friends down in Atlanta. And now I'm here, and we're going to change some things around. And he's like, I want you to come. And he was like, I know your first experience wasn't great, because I think I did some interviews or talked about it. It just wasn't really anything. And he was like, I know you don't have a good impression on him, but why don't you come up here? And so I came up, and at the end, Taylor was like, you're going to have your contract in a week or something like that. I can't remember what it was. And I was like, really? And I was like, are you sure? Because we were even at the camp, and I was like the smallest guy at the camp. And I literally was just like, are you sure I'm going to get a contract? And I really didn't believe it until I got the contract. Because I went home and I was like, yeah, they're saying I'm going to get this contract. Like, I don't know, I'm really going to get this contract or not. And lo and behold, I got the contract. And it was just, at the camp, he's like, yep, we're going to sign you. And we're not too sure what we're going to do with you. And that's kind of like, it was just kind of in limbo for a little while. And not long after I signed the contract, I I knew that Bruce Pritchard didn't really like me really that much. Like I just didn't fit the model, and I knew I was there because of Taylor. And not long after I got signed, Taylor left again. Taylor went back to Atlanta, and I was like, oh no, like I'm not going to either do anything or I'm going to be tortured, right? Because I shouldn't be there. And so there were all kinds of rumblings about what was going to be done with me, not done with me, or whatever. And they wound up sending me to Memphis. Originally, they were going to send me to Puerto Rico. And there was one guy down in Puerto Rico that I knew, Jeff Bradley, or C. Bradley. And they were going to send me down there. I don't remember what happened that they didn't send me there. But I was like, I do not want to go to Puerto Rico. I had been to Puerto Rico before, and like introverted, language barrier, all that. Like, I was like, oh my goodness, like I'm never going to leave my room. It's going to be terrible. And they wound up sending me to Memphis, which I was really surprised about. And then the talk was just like, don't buy a place. Don't stay, don't get comfortable. You're not going to be here very long. You're going to be on TV in 3 months at the absolute most. I was like, what? And so I was kind of surprised by it. And so I, along with like one or two other people, I found out that were explicitly told that. Like other people were told, like, get a place, this, that, and the other thing. And some of the other people were like, why aren't you getting a place? And I didn't want to say anything because I didn't know. I didn't know the whole deal. And so like found out from some other people, they were like, I was told not to get a place. And I'm like, oh, you too? Oh, okay. Like Ronnie Killings, he was told like, don't get a place. Right. And we wound up being there for a year.
Yeah. Wow.
And so like, it's just, it was just madness. And I think towards the end for us, like, me and Ronnie, we were pretty close when we were there, and traveled around a lot together. And like when I wasn't hanging around with Ronnie, I was hanging around with Regal. And Ronnie, he would go home a lot. He didn't live too far away, so he could go home. I was too far away to go home, and also it wasn't that easy. And so that those times I would hang out with Regal, and that just made it all right for both of us. But we ended up being in developmental, and they were just like, oh, you're not going to be here very long, and and I wound up being in developmental all the way up to the end of my contract. They wanted to re-sign me, and they gave me the big talk because I was kind of like, I don't want to be in Memphis. Nothing is going on in Memphis. Like, nobody is really coming down. Nobody's really talking about anything going on in Memphis. I just felt like there was no attention on Memphis. And I heard there was a lot of attention in OVW. And so I wanted to, and I knew Les, I wanted to go up there. I heard that Malenko was actually training people too up there. And so I was like, I want to go up there. I'm going to train. I get to train under Regal now. And Regal was leaving, and he was going back up. And I was like, if I go to train with Malenko, this would be awesome, And so I wanted to go over there, and they said no. And they were trying to do something with ECW for a minute. And so I asked to go over to ECW, and they said no. And I didn't want to stay in Memphis. And I was like, you know what? I'll just go back to the Indies. I'll go back to my regular day job and work the Indies on the weekend. And they were like,
ECW would have been a great fit.
Do that? So they had a couple of guys. I don't know enough about the relationships, but I tried to go to OVW, and they said no. And then I tried to go to ECW because that was like home for me. And I was like, oh, I can go back home. I can be home during the week or whatever. But I don't know what the relationship was there. And they had a couple guys there, but then they were like, no, I don't think that one lasted very long. Like Puerto Rico, like Bradley was in Puerto Rico forever all by himself. Right. So it was just weird, like how they had certain people in certain pockets. They had like a small organization in California when I was there, which like Cena was at.
UPW.
Yeah, so like they had like these weird pockets, and so they were just like, "No, we don't. You're staying in Memphis," and I didn't want to stay in Memphis, and because I just felt like I'm just gonna die here in Memphis. Like it's like all I could think is like the world was passing me by when I was in Memphis. Like at least if I got back on the independence, I could I could keep up with the independents and then maybe get a look at somebody else. And I really only committed to giving them a year anyway, in my own mind, because I didn't think I would be there. I didn't think I would stay there. And I didn't see a future in WWE. And right at the end, I was trying to parlay something to transition into WCW. Taylor was back there. I knew a few of the guys, more guys I knew were showing up there. And, I was trying to work something to go over there. And at the time I left, I had to non-compete for 90 days. And so I couldn't get picked up, especially because they wanted to put me on TV right away. And I couldn't do it. And then literally within that 90 days, they did the hiring freeze in WCW, and then in the first 30 days, and then 30 days after that, it was sold. And I was like, oh man, I can't, like all I wanted to do. And and by then I kind of was like, it wasn't like I could go beg for a job back at WWE. So it was just kind of like, I burned that bridge, and also because they gave me the big talk, like, oh, any people would die to be in your spot in WWE. And I was just like, I'll just go back to the Indies. I'll work in the Indies. I could do that. And I have more control over myself. I was more of an indie guy too, to be completely honest, Paul. Like I just didn't, the steam kind of carried me further in some cases than I really wanted to go, to be completely honest. Like, I loved indie wrestling. I loved the intimacy. I loved the element of control too, of my own circumstances to a degree. I could go where I want to go, when I want to go, how I want to go, kind of thing. Right. Like, I could move around. I could do those kind of things. I could work with certain people, and, whereas there I had really no control. And again, like I just never saw myself as a WWE guy. 10 years later, 20 years later, maybe 15 years later, maybe, but like that was, way before me. So, or way before, I was way before all that was going on. And so, so to me, I even thought I'll just go back to Indies. I like working in the Indies. But by the time I went back to the Indies, there was a lot that changed in that time, especially WCW fell. Like there was a lot of craziness going on, and decommissioning in a lot of states, and like the culture changed a lot afterwards. I went up getting married, having my first child, and that's the big catalyst for me to exit out of the business. I got injured and I was out for a little while. I came back. I tried to come back, but the injury would creep up on me every once in a while, and it would just kind of paralyze me for several days. And so I was like, I can't, like, I gotta like feed my family. I gotta get a kid here, and and so it was a little bit of a challenge. So I feel like, man, I feel like I'm just rambling forever on you.
Oh no, it's okay.
The stories.
Speaking of, you mentioned, the contract and then the hiring freeze. I mean, Michael Modest and Christopher Daniels, they both got contracts and then immediately just got bye. See you later.
Love those guys too. And those are two guys that I had a tremendous amount of respect for as well. And like I used to talk to Daniels, and Daniels would just be like, what's going on? How's it going on down there? I don't know. Like I'm shifting back and forth here. I'm trying to work this, that, there. And, he was definitely more ambitious than I was in many respects. And I looked at Modest, just such an awesome talent. And here you go, a guy that like went over to Noah, and Misawa himself, like one of the legends of wrestling, is like, we want more Americans like this. Right. And it was just like, he went over there and just had, so much fame, over there. And, just Modest, just stellar. Daniels, another stellar guy. I don't think Modest is competing anymore, right? But I don't know if Daniels is still competing.
He actually, he's wrestling for All Elite Wrestling.
Okay.
He's with like their head of talent relations though, so he like wrestles once in a while, and like he's doing that. I think they're gearing up for a retirement angle soon, because they just had him
this goes stellar athlete, and stellar, and it's just so hard. That's why sometimes people just give me, they ask me like, oh, what advice can you give me? Every once in a while somebody trips across me and asks, like, hey, I've heard of you. Can you give me any advice? And I usually tell them, like, if you're getting into this to be a superstar, to have an action figure or be on a video game, like, don't be doing that because of that, right? Because the chances of it happening is slim. You can be awesome and it doesn't really matter. Like, there's so many other factors that play into it. Like, do it because you love it. And that's why I loved indie wrestling. Like, I just loved being a part of indie wrestling, and my heart was for indie wrestling. Like, I fell in love with indie wrestling, my later years in high school. And like, that's all I really thought about doing. And then next thing you know, there was all this steam. And I was just kind of like, oh, I guess I'll just go. This carries me here. I'll go here. And
like, I'd be crazy not to.
Right. And there was a time where I thought to myself, like, I would have never thought to myself, like, oh, I would be a professional wrestler as a career. And still, even in the back of my mind, even when I had it as a career, I was just like, this isn't going to last that long. Like, I see so many guys I know that are on top for a minute and then not. The life expectancy for some, for wrestling, there aren't a lot that they get a lot of mileage out of it. And so to me, I'm just more pessimistic. I'm an accountant, for goodness sake. Right. So, what a safe job. Right. And so, a lot of that lingered in the back of my mind. And like I said, the other side of it is I just never saw myself as a WWE guy. Never felt comfortable there. Like, I'd go to Titan Towers and I'd be like, I don't know if I can breathe in here. I don't feel right about even breathing in here. Right. Like, you can go to the cafeteria and eat for free. And I felt like I didn't feel like I should. Right? I wouldn't even use the bathroom. I'll just wait to go to the hotel. Right. Like, I just never felt right.
Yeah. You spoke about like, guys that like, oh, don't get into it because you expect to, automatically make it and do that. Like, if you would have asked me like in the early 2000s, like guys like Christopher Daniels, his gimmick, the Fallen Angel gimmick on the indies, I was like, oh yeah, put this right in the WWE. It works. Like, I was like, this is perfect. Why isn't he signed? What's going on? And then even like his longtime tag team partner, Frankie Kazarian, is a dude that I thought WWE all the way. Like, I looked at him like, look at him. He's got the look. He's got the right moveset. Like, he looks like a star. He acts like a star. And then it just never kind of materialized. And it's just like, it really is like a weird gamble. It really is.
And, and like, because of the culture now, a lot of those guys are revered, right? A lot of those guys are revered. Like, they're looked at, they have a cult following, or a lot of people, because of just the information age we're in, they could see them and they can just be like, they were awesome, or they are awesome, or they can do that. And they can have a large amount of respect. But like, there was a time, like, when I was coming up, that like the unsung heroes like Barry Horowitz, that guy could freaking go. And I mean, if you ever saw his stuff in GWF, and when he was just able to be unleashed in GWF down in Texas, like, it was just great. Like, and some of those guys, like, there were guys like when I was coming in, they would always say, like, there are guys that are over, and then there's other guys that their job is to put people over and make people look good, right? Because there were always like these class of guys that really weren't great wrestlers, but they had like a look and they would get a push. But the other guys had to make them look like superstars. And so there was a place for that. So like, if anything, I thought like, man, like, the best case scenario I could be in the WWF world, right, would probably be one of those, like, early to mid 90 goofy gimmicks, right? Like, remember they came out with all these goofy gimmicks, right?
Yeah.
Like, some great wrestlers that, they wanted the enhanced jobbers, and they threw all these goofy gimmicks on like scores of these guys that were just great wrestlers, but like, there was something, for some reason, they didn't get the push. And so I thought, like, if anything, I would probably be relegated into that space, maybe, if I somehow stayed in the company. They wanted me to be a talker because they liked me talking. And I just, that was the one creative idea that they came back with that I was just kind of like, no, not really feeling that at all. And that was like kind of like a scarlet letter on me, that I was already a troublemaker as it was. And I was just a troublemaker because I wouldn't do certain things and I would get in trouble for it. I was always getting in trouble in Memphis. I feel bad. I look back now and, the promoter, the guy was running it, Terry Golden. I was such a troublemaker for him. I was such a troublemaker for him. I used to mess up TV shows all the time, like goofing around and stuff and ribbing people. I would just, I'd just get in trouble, and I would always wind up getting in trouble. And then they would just put me in with I had to do one time I got in trouble for messing around, and they made me do a program with Viscera, and so you could little me Viscera, and so they and so they put me in this one match. I was pretty sure I was getting in trouble, and I'm working Viscera, and Viscera was so big. There was just he wasn't trying to hurt me, but he was just so big and I was so little. And I know you've had to see the Wizard of Oz, right? Mm-hmm. And in the beginning when the house falls on the Wicked Witch and it's just her feet. So he would do the splash finisher. So the first night he does this splash finisher on me, right? And literally I'm eclipsed underneath of him and all you can see is my two boots.
Oh my God.
Sticking out from underneath. And they thought in the back that was the funniest thing in the world. So they put me in a program with them for a month.
Oh, Jesus.
And so every night, because when we were in Memphis, when we first got in Memphis, we weren't working that much. But towards the end, last handful or so months, we were working 25, 26 days a month. And that included TV tapings. And so sometimes we were working 3 and 4 times in TV tapings. So we were dying. And so then I got put in a program with Viscera. He was killing me. And I was the underdog, right? And so I was this little guy and it was and he was huge. And so that was the funniest thing. It would just be the house and it would just be just my feet sticking out.
Yeah. I want to go into Chikara and how that came about. Because you mentioned earlier about fans smartening up. And I think what ended up happening is a lot of promotions, they ended up having to either create gimmicks or do programs that were kind of tongue-in-cheek because they knew fans were smart. And they were like, okay, well, how can we play that to a strength? And that's kind of, to me, how something like Chikara comes about. I'll let you go ahead and explain.
So I can't take any creative any creative credit for what went on in Chikara. That was all the brainstorm of Mike Quackenbush, all of that character development. He was a huge fan of Osaka Pro, and so he was trying to. It felt like he was trying to do an Osaka Pro kind of thing in the U.S. and in the little niche that we were in. My contributions really were early on, Quack just approached me. He said, hey, I got this opportunity. Do you want to come in and invest with me? I think, with both of our names, we can, get something going with this. And he was really the strength in everything. I did a few things in the beginning, getting the rings and showing them how to set up rings and stuff like that and all. And, just brought name and maybe being able to connect with a few people and stuff like that and all. But, early on doing a lot of the training. From a creative standpoint, he's the one that came up with all of the stuff that they did there. So unfortunately I can't take any credit for that. So a lot of the direction he went, it was the brainchild, it was a brainchild of Mike Quackenbush. I didn't really do much, but come up with the name, the logo, and that was an agreed upon thing. And did some of the accounting and got the rings. I did a lot of initial things with it, and I stepped away from it about a year in. I stepped away from it. It was a pretty big commitment going up there 3 times a week. I was working a day job. I was about an hour and a half away from there. So. And like I said, this was a time where I got married. I was getting married, and there were a lot of moving parts, and it just wasn't financially viable. And I was like, this is taking a lot of time. There's other areas, it was hard. It was taking more money than anything. It was hard. It wasn't like we got ahead on anything. If we got ahead, suddenly something would break on the ring and it would cost thousands of dollars to fix. If we started to get ahead, then like somebody tried to sue us and all. And so like it ate up money. So like, it was just like, it was losing money at a time where I needed to bring in more money. And I stepped away. And so unfortunately, I can't take too much credit other than like that initial class or two that came through and really just being a partner with him early on and then supporting him over the time. I think when I came out of that, I was doing like the technician thing and stuff like that. And I was always wearing Chikara gear and putting over Chikara. I was still working with Chikara here and there, but it was still more of it was a brainchild of Quack. So unfortunately, I'm sorry.
No, it's
take
okay.
Credit for that.
Who were some of the standouts in the students in the beginning?
So there, when I was there, man, you know, the funny thing is like trying to remember everybody's names. Like what was more surprising than anything is the flood of people that wanted to be trained. I was worried like, oh man, like we'll be, you know, like, you know, maybe we'll get like 2 or 3 guys and we'd have like 10 or 12 guys. And so there were a lot of guys. I can remember, you know, like the Ultramanus Black, Mr. Zero, like some of those guys in that first class. You know, a second class was, you know, Eddie Kingston was in there. What were him and the other guy? They were a tag team. See, now you're really pushing me back. I'm trying to remember now. But, you know, like I was coming in training and I was doing more of like the basic training, a lot of the basics. I was really just big on a lot of the basics. And so I was just making sure they had a good foundation and all to build off of, you know, from that. And Quack would watch him, and Quack was really good with that. He would just watch him and he would come up with ideas and give him a gimmick or sell them on it, and they would do it and all. And so, yeah, like, unfortunately, I'm trying to remember all the different names. I know I'm credited with like training, quite a few people. Cause I spent a lot of time, I probably spent more time training people down in Philly earlier on in my career, in a place called Hawkins Gym. And there were a number of people that came out of there, and like probably most notable, Trent Acid. And also Trent Acid would credited me as his trainer. You know, it was sad what happened with him. That was one of the things, like, man, like, you know, wrestling is tough enough as it is, but then you start getting really close with some of these people, and you know, like it just breaks your heart what happens to some of these people. And it's you know, like people were dying for all different types of reasons, but far too many people that I've known, you know, in the last 10 years have sadly died, and you know, 10 or more years have sadly died, you know, just with like just really tragic circumstances. And that's hard, like, you know, especially for guys I hadn't really seen in a long time or really connected with deeply, but at one time I knew how they thought of me, looked at me, and how much time I did spend with them. I can remember when Trent passed, that hit me pretty hard, and it stayed with me for a long time. I felt, I mean, I'm sure so many people did in and around him, felt a certain amount of guilt too, like we all do, like things like that, the survivors, right? That would just always just burden so terribly with just like, you know, could we have done more? You know, should we have done more? Could we have been a little bit more involved? Maybe, you know, maybe, and you know, so you hang on to that. And I'm probably not saying, I mean, anybody that might be listening, or maybe even you can identify with that to some degree, right?
Yeah.
A loss where you kind of feel like, man, if I only did more, right? And we carry that weight on ourselves. But, you know, I can remember with him, like, it was pretty tough. It was pretty tough. And then, you know, and so many other guys I know too, you know, tragic.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a really harsh lifestyle, you know, working the independents. You know, it's mentally taxing on anyone, let alone if like you're an addict or anything like that. It's just, it, you know, exponentially makes it worse. And I know what you mean. I had recently a friend who I've known for like 20 years who died, basically drank himself to death, and it was kind of like, you know, you do think that. You go like, oh man, like what could I have done? You know, but
yeah. It's hard not to. And I mean, it's good to say those things to yourself, like, and you usually have somebody, around that'll give you counsel. Like there's nothing you could have done. I mean, I'm a product of, if you're familiar with cross-addicted alcoholics, right? I had both parents were drug addicts and alcoholics. My father took his own life and left me to find him. So it was tough, right? Like, like I know like a lot of those things, right? Like going to counseling, all those kind of things. I know that kind of stuff, but still, you still feel it like, right? Like, oh, did I do everything I could have or should have done? Right? Would my conscience be more clear if I did? And the reality is probably wouldn't, right? You probably still feel like, oh, there's so much more I could have done. Right. And it's just tough. Like I said, I just know, even just recently, one of the guys that I knew for a number of years, Z-Bar, he was in the Northeast area, CZW standout, passed tragically as well. And just kind of like, you hear about these different things. Ouch. Like that just hurts. Right. I knew Steve Bradley too. Right. And I mean, when things happen to these people, oh man, just feel terrible.
Yeah.
About it.
One guy at the time who now is getting kind of a big, not a huge push, but he's kind of getting a lot of TV time lately now is Eddie Kingston in All Elite Wrestling. What was he like as a younger man in Chikara?
He was, I only like trained him for like a minute, and it was kind of funny because I like laughed because he was training somewhere. He trained somewhere else before he even came to Chikara. So I laughed because I would work with him on stuff, and I'd kind of be like, like you trained somewhere else. I know you worked somewhere else. So I don't know if he had like, I'm not really familiar with all the background. If he had more humble beginnings like me, like snuck his way into the business kind of thing. And it was so funny. Like I would get into the business and like the secret was having boots, right? And having a pair of tights, and people would be like, oh, well, he must be a wrestler. He must have trained somewhere because he's actually got boots. Right. And so, sneaking into the business and then everybody else talking bad about, these people that sneak into the business. I was like, and so like, I don't know if he was training somewhere in New York. I feel like he was training somewhere in the city. There was somebody, Johnny Rods, maybe he was training there before or something. He came to Chikara. So I didn't train with him that much, or I didn't train him that much because I felt like he knew everything. I was like, I don't really know how much I can really contribute. Because like I said, I did more of the basic stuff. I had the privilege to work, not him, but to work on shows with him. And he just always seemed like real serious business. Like he was like, he was just serious business. Like he was the kind of guy that like, if we were walking down an alley together, like going different directions, I probably would like cling real close to the wall. I'd be worried, right? Because he would beat me up, right?
Yeah.
And because like I'm a fake fighter, right? And so like I can't really, like Eddie Murphy did in a comedy skit. He's like, I can beat you up, in a fake fight because I'm the star, right? And I'm not, but he looked like he could kill me for real, and so. I was always worried.
Yeah, his whole thing was he had a match on TNT for All Elite Wrestling, and he wasn't signed yet, and they let him, like, because Cody Rhodes did like an open challenge. So basically he came in and they let him cut a promo before the match, and everyone was blown away. So then he had the match. Yeah, he had the match, and then they gave him a contract basically on the spot. They were like, "Oh yeah, you're in." And so now like there's like internet clips of him doing stuff like they'll be like here, and they'll toss him like a thing of Sour Patch Kids, and they're like, "Cut a promo on this Sour Patch Kids right now," and he'll just sit there and he'll just like come up with a promo talking about the Sour Patch Kids, and it's excellent stuff.
So probably like man, I feel like a wrestling generation before him, probably one of the great talkers that would do stuff like that was Steve Corino. Steve Corino was such a great talker, and he was just known for being a great talker. As much as people would say I was he was 100 times better than me. And he would literally do that. They would like, I heard stories, but I would see him, like he's just great at cutting promos. But I would hear stories like when he was in ECW, they would mess around with him and they would have him cut like a 10-minute promo and the camera wouldn't even be on, and then have him do it all over again. And he would do another one totally different, 10 times as good. Right. And he was just a great talker too. So yeah, I mean, Eddie was definitely a great talker. And so it's funny because when you say certain people, I remember generation before like Carino, and I remember him being such a great talker.
So I have to ask, the nickname, the king of the independents. How does that come about? And how much shit did people give you on the indies because of it?
Man, I don't know what was worse, the King of the Independents moniker or like my PWI ranking. And so like those things, like after time, just became a curse. So we were doing this angle in Michigan. In Michigan, we were up there, and it was at the time NWO, all that kind of stuff. And there was we were working for a company up there in Michigan, in Detroit area or outside of Detroit, and Don Montoya and I came up with this idea, like just goofing around, and we started calling ourselves the East Coast Invasion. And we did some satellite show in, like, I can't remember where it was. Did some satellite show, and we just, either myself or Alvarez, Montoya, went and we got like these shirts made that said like East Coast Invasion on them. And the promoter was like, hey, that would be great, like to do like this angle or whatever. And Dave Prazak was connected with us there. And next thing you know, it just had a life of its own. And East Coast Invasion. And so then it was like, bring some guys from the East Coast. We're going to do this big promotional thing. So the first time we come out to do like this glorified East Coast Invasion thing, Dave Prazak is on the mic introducing us, and he's giving everybody a moniker as they come out, right? And he calls me the King of the Independents. He called me the King of the Independents. Next thing you know, that was just like coined, and everybody starts calling me the King of the Independents. And in some people's minds, no, I didn't deserve it. In other people's minds, yeah, rightfully so. In some circles, I'm like, I'm going to run with this. This is good marketing. I'll sell some shirts.
Yeah.
But it quickly became a curse. King of the Independents quickly became a curse. It's just hard. Like sometimes when you're around some guys, right? Like, and they might've been around longer than you, and they see you have that name or whatever. But it was hard. Like I can remember the first, 95 to 97, 98. I financed myself everywhere. I had a day job to support my wrestling habit and all. And I went places for very little money. And just to get my name out there, because I was trying to do the Sean Waltman thing. And so I think that was part of the King of the Independents thing. But not at the time, nobody else was doing that. Either nobody else was doing that, or nobody else could do that, or nobody else was thinking about doing it, right? And all it took was that networking, and like go out and work really hard, and then guy ones would bring me back. And be respectful to everybody, put the guy over, do whatever I had to do. And so it got that steam. But some of the other guys that weren't traveling, that weren't doing that kind of stuff, they hated that. I feel like it came to a point where only the fans really liked that moniker. And then PWI, I started shooting up in the PWI rankings. And I think, being numbered 50, which I think I still hold the record for the highest independent wrestler to never work in a major company, the highest ranking still in the PWI. I think that still holds true. That was, and I think I was like one spot above Hogan. Man, people wanted to kill me for that. I got potatoed a lot. I got potatoed a lot in the ring for that kind of stuff. And I'm just like, what? Like somebody else ranked me this. Why are you guys so mad at me? So yeah, that was like, it was, a blessing and a curse all at the same time. Like the King of the Independents, and it was just something that I feel like rolled off of Dave Prazak's tongue. I had heard rumors many years later that Sabu was coined the original King of the Independents. I had heard that many years later. I don't know how true it was. I know that apparently that moniker, was carried on to other people after me. And they probably felt the same way too. Like it was a blessing and a curse at the same time. I know the pressure, just was amplified 1,000% to, have the best match, perform perfectly, never get anything wrong. I can remember there was a guy, Bridgeport, Connecticut. I worked the show up in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I worked this territory a number of times in Connecticut. And this one guy came in one day and he had like one of the magazines, and he said, "You know what? I drove a couple hours to see you because I heard about how awesome you are. And you were such a disappointment. And I was going to have you sign my magazine, and I don't even want to have you sign my magazine because it'd be a complete waste. You're terrible. You weren't even worth my ride." And I was like, I remember just being completely crushed.
Jesus.
I was just like, oh man, like talk about soul crushing. And I can remember the guy, whatever it was, the guy was just kind of like coming down on me. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you had the impression of me. And I was just like really apologetic. And I remember a couple of the other guys actually had overheard what was going on. And I remember they came over, started yelling at him, was threatening to beat him up. And I was like, no, just leave the guy alone. Like, he's entitled to his opinion and all. And oh man, yeah, he was laying into me terrible. And I remember just being like, oh man. But then I would have these experiences where I would go like some places and people would be like, we traveled 4 hours to see you and it was worth every minute in the car ride. And so like you would have like these highs and you would have these lows. And,
wow.
It was rough. It was rough. I mean, like my time, I wasn't out in Cali that much, and I loved my time out in Cali. And that was the thing, like anywhere I went, I just loved it. I loved entertaining people. I loved performing. I always said if like a lot of the politics, a lot of the stuff in the back was really hard for me. But like, if you could like Star Trek beam me to the, like right at the gorilla for me to walk out. And then as soon as I come back, Star Trek beam me home, like that would have been awesome. I would have probably stayed in it a lot longer, but, a lot of the other stuff it was tough and all. So, but to say that, like there were a lot of great fan experiences. There were a lot of rough fan experiences. Same thing with the boys there weren't too many bad experiences with the guys over the years. There were very few experiences that were really bad that I thought guys were like really out to get me or hurt me for something, like, or undercut me because I was being looked at, right? Like, try to use the opportunity to make me look bad. Most of the time, it was about getting the match over, not necessarily getting, somebody over, right? And, it was about getting the match over. It was about getting the show over. And I usually tried to work like that, and that's what it was about. So I wasn't, I didn't have to do everything every night. And I didn't have a problem with losing. Most of the time, even when I went over, I refused to go over big. So I would go over with like a roll up or something goofy like that. I mean, I would have people kick out of my finisher, like my finisher, whatever it may be, because I thought that just added to, more to the match on top of it, especially if people are like, Frog Slash is his finisher, or, like, this is his finisher, and I would have, the guy kick out, and that just added to the suspense that much more. And like I said, even if I went over small, I didn't go over big. Didn't have a problem with laying down to somebody big either. So, in a big way, I just thought it just, especially if the crowd was engaged and was really working the crowd, like, and I was working a heel roll, like that was great for me to like go under and the crowd to explode. That was great. Or if I was a baby face, like it's much harder to work as a baby face to get yourself over if you don't have a strong heel, right? Than if you're a strong heel to go under, making the baby face look like a superstar, right? So most of the time I worked heel, and it just kind of so I didn't have a problem with laying down at all. Creatively, getting people over, and even if one went over, when I was NWA champ, I used to get in trouble with the NWA all the time. When I was the North American champion, I would go all around, and that's kind of like what a catalyst that really started getting me everywhere. I was the NWA North American champion, but it wasn't really defended anywhere. And so I was traveling, so I would take the belt everywhere and I would do a title defense. And wherever I was, I would wind up going over, but I would slip myself over, but I would make the baby face, look like he won, right? So I would do one of those jammies where the ref would get knocked down kind of thing, and the baby face would have me pinned, and they would slide in a second ref and count me, and it looked like a title change, and then the other guy would get up, and like we would do stuff like that, and just like the fans just loved it, and the workers loved it. I loved it, and it was a lot of fun. And so it's stuff like that, just getting real creative in the ring and trying to make everybody go home happy or feel like they got their money's worth. And that's what mattered to me. And all, like if somebody paid, however much to get in, I was hoping that, at the very least, my match was the match of the record, because that's the way I felt, right? Mm-hmm. When I was watching indie wrestling, I used to follow these guys, Johnny Hotbody and Tony Stetson. Found out about this local feud. That's how I got even connected with independent wrestling. Johnny Hotbody and Tony Stetson. I didn't even care who else was on the show, and they would have names on the show, and I'd be like, I'm here to see Johnny Hotbody and Tony Stetson, and I'm here to see what they're gonna do, right? And because I was a huge Hotbody mark, and so I would just be like, I would just want to see this, and so I paid $15 to see that match, right? Yeah. And so I knew if I was like that, right, there's a lot of other people that were there for one match, right? And the other matches might be bonuses, might be great, or over the years they got the benefit of having a lot of great matches, but if they paid $10, $15, $20, $25, however much they paid to get in, I wanted them to feel like they got their money's worth, hopefully at my match. But that didn't always happen.
Brother, it is time to take this bad boy home. I have a list of questions here. It is the go home segment of the podcast.
Gotta fire through them.
You can take as much time as you want, really. It's not really a hard rule. But if Andre the Giant is the 8th wonder of the wrestling world, who for you are the other 7 wonders of the wrestling world? Basically, almost an extended Mount Rushmore of wrestlers to you.
Definitely Lou Thesz, Tiger Mask, Misawa, Muda, Flair, Road Warriors, and Johnny Saint.
There you go. Speaking of Misawa, by the way, we talked about Modest earlier. When Misawa came out to do the Pro Wrestling Iron show in NorCal, he did that at Noah's expense. Modest was like, "Oh, we'd like to have someone from Noah come, but we can't really afford anything." And they're like, "Don't worry about it." And yeah, Misawa and Ogawa came for free.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Insane.
And that's the kind of respect. That's the kind of respect that Modest had, right? Yeah. From that organization, and that just speaks volumes about Modest, right? And so, yeah.
What are some of your favorite road stories?
I thought you said you got to wrap this thing up. Man, we got to have a part 2 to go through road stories. When you say road stories, do you mean not in the ring?
I just mean traveling to shows, any of that stuff.
So, just funny story. I'd love to tell you 2. One outside of the ring and one inside the ring.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. So, outside of the ring, we're doing this show in Grand Rapids, Michigan. D'Lo was with me. It was Don Montoya, D'Lo, and myself were doing this show in Grand Rapids, Michigan. D'Lo, it was pretty early when he was in Nation of Domination. They were still lending out talent or whatever. He was just, I'm trying to remember if he did the show or if he just came with us. He had to do the show. Anyway, long and short is he came with us, and he was really big. Something happened. He was really big in staying in Nights Inns. And everybody knows, we had to travel on our own expense a lot of times, right? And so we would all group up in hotel rooms together and things like that. And he was like, "We're going to stay in Nights Inn. I've been staying in Nights Inn. They're really good right now," right? And so we're like, okay, we're trusting them. We're going to stay in Nights Inn. So we get in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I don't know anything. It's the first time there. And we went up just turn off the first Nights Inn near the venue, turn off and go. Well, we didn't realize it, but we happened to be in a really, really bad area of town. And this Night's Inn was not a nice Night's Inn. And we get in there, and there's like prostitution, drug dealing going on. Somebody was shot while we were there, and the cops were there and like raided the place. Like, it was insane. But so, mind you, so I'm like, this place is crazy. Like, and by this point we paid our money. Like, it was not like we could really get our money back, so we got to stay there. And the place was pretty disgusting. I was like, I'm gonna sleep with all my clothes on, like even the hood on, my jacket, like laying down on the. And they stepped out for something. Montoya and Dee step out for something, and I go to the bathroom. And I'm in the bathroom, doing my business in the bathroom. And it was one of those ones where like kind of the wall's right next to you and you're kind of on the toilet. And I kind of look over at the wall, and suddenly I see like a piece of paper. Like, it looks like it's like it was wallpaper, and it looks like there's like a piece of paper that's kind of glued over top. And I'm looking at it, I'm going, that's a weird way to cover that up. And then I looked and I saw another one. And then I saw another one, and I saw another one. And I'm like, this is a bad cover-up job. Like, what were they trying to cover up? And I started to look, and no lie, it was framed around like a body sitting on the toilet. So somebody had come through the door, must have shot a shotgun, because I started peeling the paper, and it was all little shotgun. So somebody died right on the toilet.
Shit.
Terrible. I was like, somebody was literally murdered in the same spot that I'm sitting right now. Like, I don't care how, like, there was no, this was like, and it was like, and so I tell this story to everybody to just say, like, and that was, I can't even remember what year that was, but I never stayed at a Night's Inn ever again. Now, I mean, there might have been nicer Night's Inns and stuff like that. We were obviously not in a great area. And there was enough stories of that night alone, but just to tell you that I'm sitting there and I'm literally peeling, and I'm going, what's that? Like, it would look like a BB thing at first, and then I'm peeling it, and then I'm looking, and I'm realizing framing my entire body. Somebody must have come in with a shotgun and shot a shotgun, and
holy shit,
shotgun, and already, yeah, somebody got. I was like, oh man, talk about sitting like right in somebody's grave, right? Like, that was crazy. Wow. Second story, I could tell you so many stories. I'm trying to think about. So this is when I was in Memphis. This is one of the ones that I got in so much trouble for. Did you ever hear about the rubber chicken story?
No.
Okay. So maybe I just told this to some of the boys or whatever. But anyway, we're down in Memphis. Me and Blue Meanie are working like this tag team series with Jim Neidhart, and I can't remember the other person. But anyway, it was a night that they decided, like, oh, okay, we're going to go over, right? But it's Jim Neidhart, and I know Jim, he's a big name. We're not going to go over. I think we might have been heels, so we weren't going to go. If we were going over, we were going to be, we weren't going to go over fairly, this, that, and the other thing. And so I knew all about this ahead of time, and well ahead of time. And I was like, because we did a program, you wind up doing a program for like a month and a half. And so I was like, he's going to give us those gimmick brass knuckle thingies or whatever, to hit him with at the end of the match. I said, how about if we go to Spencer Gifts and get one of those rubber chickens? And like, cause he's going to turn around. He's not going to know what hits him. He's just going to sell it. And Meanie's like, there's no way I'm going to do that. There's no way I'm going to do that. And so I was like, come on, just do the rubber chicken and blah, 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 blah. And so finally I convinced Meanie to do it. Because Meanie, the jokester, he doesn't want to do it. And so I get one of those rubber chickens you squeeze it and it makes the weird noise. And I get the rubber chicken. So we're in the back, and Neidhart's telling us to finish, and he hands us the gimmick brass knuckles. We're like, And Meanie goes, I can't do this. We can't do this. Because they were filming it for TV. And I'm like, listen, dude, we're doing it. He was like, just do the knuckles. So something happened where I went in and I slipped it under the ring before we came out, like earlier. So I was like, it's under the ring. And he's like, no, do the brass knuckles. And so the end of the match comes, and I reach under the ring, and I do the big toss to Meanie, the rubber chicken. And he catches it, and so this is all, they're filming this on camera. He catches the rubber chicken, Neidhart like just spins around and he whacks Neidhart with the rubber chicken, and Neidhart takes this huge bump and he covers him 1, 2, 3, and the crowd's laughing and everything and all. And so I walk into the back, I'm laughing and everything. I walk into the back, and Neidhart comes in and he is going to kill me. Like literally, like everybody in the locker room had to hold him back. He wanted to kill me. He's like, he was this close to me, he's spitting all over me, he's yelling at me, and he's trying to hit me. Like, and everybody's holding him back. And so like he was furious with me, and I had to do a program with him for the next couple of days and all. And he was furious. He knew it was me. He was like, "Hey, man, do it there." And he was like, "You made me look bad on TV." Well, then it turns out he sits down. He's furious. And then the promoter came in, and the promoter is yelling and screaming because I ruined the TV cut. And they couldn't use it for TV, so they just wasted TV, like they wasted the filming and stuff like that and all. So the promoter wanted to kill me that night. I thought for sure I was going to get beat up by somebody, but it was just one of those comical moments that like I was laughing so hard to see him sell the rubber chicken, and because you turn it around and you're just expecting the gimmick, right? And right as he turned around, he gets waffled with the gimmick, and he just took the bump. And he gets pinned, and everybody's just laughing their brains out and all. And it was just so that was the rubber chicken. And so 2 goofy stories. Like I said, I could tell so many other stories, but I figure I'll give you one, while traveling, and another one in the ring that almost got me killed. That one almost got me killed.
There you go.
People.
Yeah, I might have to hit you up to do a full-on story episode just to really go out.
Stories? I'll give you a whole bunch of stories. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's fantastic already. That's 2 gold ones right there. What is a favorite move or hold that you never used?
So one of my favorite moves is the sit-out moonsault. That also affectionately called the Arabian moonsault by Sabu. The one that invented it, it's like it's between the 2 posts, and he would sit and bounce like his thighs and flip back. I used it a few times, but the older I got, the less comfortable I felt doing it, and I loved it. Daniels did it all the time too. That's probably by far one of my favorite moves, is that sit-out moonsault. I love that.
What is the craziest fan interaction you had?
Well, probably that one in Connecticut that I shared, where that guy just like ripped me apart.
Yeah,
and all.
That's not so fun though. That one.
Yeah. Well, that's why. Yeah, I'm trying to think. So funny story. Probably crazy fan interaction. It was I was in Texas, so I was doing some shows in Texas. And I was an indie guy, right? So you had to be a hardcore fan if you knew me, and especially if you recognized me, right? Glasses on, like Clark Kent, right? Glasses off, Superman. Like most people, I would perform, and then I would walk out after I performed out in the show, and nobody would even recognize me, right? And they might have just been trying to rip my head off. People didn't normally recognize me. So if anybody ever recognized me on the street, right, I would always be crazy respectful and all, because they had to be a serious fan if they knew who I was. And so I was in Texas, and often I would go to places, and I would travel, and I would get to places early because I always had like anxiety about getting to a place on time. And I would get into the town really early, fly in early, all that kind of stuff, get into town early. And I would always go to I would hang out at the airports for a while, just sit and people watch, or I would go to the malls and sit and people watch. So I'm in Texas, I'm sitting and I'm people watching in this mall, and this group of guys walk by, and don't you know, they're like, "Hey, that's Reckless Youth." And they walked up and they started talking to me. I wound up taking pictures with them and everything. And next thing you know, other people were walking by, and I guess it caused enough of a commotion. Other people were asking who I was and stuff like that. And so that was kind of neat. That was just a neat interaction. It kind of caught me off guard. Craziest fan interaction. I just thought it was always weird when somebody would recognize me, like out of the element, just looking my normal nerdy self, and somebody would recognize me. That would always be interesting. Even as my kids got older, people would recognize me here and there many years later, and my kids would no-sell me. They'd be like, "Why was that person talking to you?" they like aren't fans of anything. So TikTok dancers, maybe that's about it. But not of wrestling.
As a you know, quote unquote, a civilian now, no longer in the business. Like how often, like, does maybe your wife or someone, like when you meet someone new, like, you know, you have new friends or whatever, someone go like, you know, he used to be a pro wrestler, like just like almost like mess with you to be like, now you got to sit there and explain, yeah, I wrestled for a long time and like.
So on my professional resume, I have to account for the time. Particularly, I was with the WWE, right? So I was in the accounting profession leading up to that. I had to quit that job to go into the WWE, and so I have to account for that time. And so I put in there that I was talent, Stamford, Connecticut, World Wrestling Entertainment, and inevitably that always comes up in interviews, or now through LinkedIn, people will. You know, like I read that, like, you know, what did you do for WWE? Like, you know, like, what were you, an accountant for them or whatever? Something like that. But like here and there, I run across people that might know me. So at work, it's common knowledge. There are a couple people at work that knew me, like that knew of Reckless Youth. And so here and there, people will make a big deal about like, oh, that's, you know, Reckless Youth or whatever, or he used to be a wrestler and also it always inspires interesting talks. And I got 1,000 stories that are worth probably nothing, but except a little laugh here and there. And so I always got some stories to tell people about different interactions with different people or different circumstances and all.
When you were working with someone new, what's the worst thing they could do in a match?
I hated chops. I hated getting chopped. So I used to tell people, like, don't chop me. But sometimes people would chop me, or sometimes I would work with people and that was like their gimmick to chop. And so it would be like, oh, I had to take the chop. But probably the worst thing that would happen is I worked with a few people that would like roid rage. And being with a roid rager, right? Like, so it's one thing to be on the independents and feel 500, 600, 1,500, you know, people, 2,000 people all facing your direction and, you know, your chest rumbling. But like working like a Fed show where there's like 15,000, 25,000, and suddenly the crowd erupts for somebody, like you can't even breathe in the ring, right? Like you can just feel all the sound vibrations. Like you know, trying to perform in those things, like it's just amazing. But you know, like oftentimes the explosion of a crowd in a situation like that, because I was usually heel, it was my job to get the baby over and get an explosive reaction from the baby. And if the baby was like a roid rager, it was on the gas or something, and they would roid rage. Like there was no turning back. Like, you know, like unless you had to take them down and stretch them to try to wake them up. And also like getting in the ring with a roid rager was, you know, like, and you wouldn't know it, right? Like you wouldn't always know it until like it happened. Next thing you know, they're like punching you for real. And you're like, whoa, I want to go to Outback Steakhouse after this. Like, dude, I'm not going to be able to eat. You're punching me in the face so hard.
Oh, wow. Damn. Speaking of which, actually, one of the questions I have, so this actually works out perfectly. Who had the stiffest chops?
Big Rick Fuller. If you've ever heard of that guy. Man, there is a match out there, JCW, I did in New Jersey. I had to wrestle this guy in like a tournament or just wrestle him, whatever. And he was a big dude. And he was a nice guy too. Big dude though. In WCW for a minute. I think he might have been under Fed deal, but he was huge. And he was like one of those guys. He's like his shirts he sold, he had like a handle on it that was like as big as like a person's body. And I knew one of the big things he did is he did this chop sequence. So we back in the corner, overhand, knife edge, overhand. And we're working, and I know I got to take the chop, like because I'm going over on this guy. He's flipping me over, and it's not a long match, and so he's getting everything in, and that's one of the things he's going to do. And I was dreading it. He backs me in the corner, and if you find this video, I know because I've seen it, and I laugh at it. He backs me into this corner. It's right at the end of the match. He goes, you know, up, down, and then he whisks me to the other side. I'm supposed to move out of the way and schoolboy him up 1, 2, 3, right? And he backs me in the corner, He gives me the overhand. Pow! And everything went black. He chopped me, and I couldn't see anything. It was
Jesus.
so painful. It was so painful. Overhands me, and I just was like, oh, like I couldn't see anything. You hear about like pain so excruciating, like it makes you pass out, like kind of thing. Like everything went black, and I was just like, and I remember thinking to myself, that overhand was terrible. Maybe his knife edge isn't that bad. He hits me with the knife edge, and mind you, everything's black. I can't see anything. He hits me with the knife edge. No lie. In the back of my throat, I tasted Snickers. You would think you would think I ate a Snicker bar. He gave me a boom, boom, and like at this point, I tasted Snickers, and I don't know what happened after that. I know what the finish was supposed to be, and mind you, there was a third chop because I saw the video, and he whips me across the ring, and it's almost comical to watch because I'm like I can't even run. I'm like falling all over the place. I go into the corner. I fall out. He kind of like falls over me and pins himself. Like it's a hot mess. 3 chops. My life expectancy was shortened through those 3 chops. Probably the worst thing. I've been chopped by other people that hurt. 1 chop, blackout. Next chop, everything went black. Next chop, Snickers. No lie, it tastes like I ate like a Snicker bar. Like isn't it weird? And I never felt a third one.
Wow.
Never felt a third one. I didn't come to. I don't remember. It was like I had a concussion, and this guy chopped me in the chest.
Jesus.
Because I didn't come into it in the locker room until several. I remember being in the locker room later going, looking around like I had a concussion. I guess the match is over, and my chest was bleeding and.
God.
Big Rick Fuller killed me. Literally killed me.
I'm assuming the first part to this question is going to be a yes. Has a booker tried to stiff you on money? And if so, what are some excuses as to why?
Surprisingly, I never got booked. Let me set that. I only ever had one experience that I didn't get paid for work. Everybody else paid me. And so I got paid something. I remember one time I got paid a hot dog and relish. So I got paid.
So you literally got the hot dog and a handshake.
I got a hot dog with relish, and you want to know what's crazy? I don't like relish, and so I didn't even eat the hot dog. But I got paid by everybody. There was not a time. There were times that I got paid when I didn't work too. I remember flying places and getting sick or something happened. I had a lot of problems with planes and stuff, and I got caught on a couple of propeller planes. One time I got food poisoning. And I got paid, right? So I was always well taken care of. The only time I didn't get paid, the only time I was ever not paid for work was the one and only time I worked for ECW. And Paul Lee called me. He was talking about having me come in, and he was going to give me a salary and this, that, and the other thing. And I was going to come in and talking about all of that. I came in. I definitely had a subpar match with Nova that night. I had a fever, not making excuses. I was sick, but definitely didn't have the best match, and I didn't get paid at all. And I went back and forth with him, and didn't wind up going back. But I take a little comfort in knowing that I wasn't the only one that experienced that. There were a lot of boys later on that I found out that weren't getting paid, so it wasn't like I was unique or anything like that. But maybe I got a little heat for not staying there like a lot of other people did and not get paid. But at the time I was just making good money in the indies and all. And that was another place I was a little scared to be at. As much as I wanted to be at, I didn't want to be at because the hardcore stuff didn't appeal to me. And I was a little worried about getting beat up with chairs and stuff like that. But that was the only person that I ever didn't get paid from. So everybody else paid me.
This might have already been answered when it comes to the rubber chicken stuff, but what's the hardest you've laughed at an indie show?
Yeah, it's probably the rubber chicken. Probably the rubber chicken, yeah. I would just say the rubber chicken. That would probably be a good one that, I couldn't stop laughing even though I was going to get killed. I couldn't stop laughing. It just, there were some other times where, like it was common to make each other laugh when we were in the ring and things like that. So there was stuff like that. There wasn't ever a time where it was like kind of like uncontrollable where I couldn't stop. Like probably like the rubber chicken though. I'll tell you one time.
You were in the business for quite a while. You traveled to a lot of different territories, a lot of different companies. What's some of the worst gimmicks you've seen?
So when I first started, I would classify a lot of those early 90s to mid 90s gimmicks as terrible gimmicks. But traveling on the indies, when I was coming up at Larry Sharp's, towards the tail end of Larry Sharp's, there was a lot more rigidity when I was first there. And then towards the end, it was a lot looser. So like I told you, when I first started, like nobody could do their own gimmick. And they had to like see what you develop into over time. And towards the end, people could just pick their gimmicks, and they could do their gimmicks on the first show. And so there was this one guy. He desperately wanted to call himself the Power Destroyer. Now, that being said, you would have this image in your mind that this would be this 6'5", buff bodybuilder guy. This guy, now I was like 165 pounds, skinny, but like this guy was like 5'4", skinnier than me, whiter than me, like paler than me. And he desperately wanted to call himself the Power Destroyer. And not only that, but he like, he would wear no shirt or anything too. And it's like, and he called himself the Power Destroyer. It was the most ridiculous thing. And we tried to talk to him like, this just does not suit you. Like maybe just use your real name for a little while, because we were still hanging on to some of that stuff. And he was like, "Nope, I'm the Power Destroyer. I'm gonna trademark that name, this, that, and the other." The guy lasted a minute. The Reckless Youth name was taken from somebody else anyway, so like I didn't even have an amazing amount of originality in myself. It was somebody else that allowed me to use that name. So, but yeah, this guy, Power Destroyer, totally didn't suit him. That was easily the worst, like on the indies, that I ever saw. Yeah, that was definitely one. You'll never find that.
Yeah. It's interesting because I remember hearing that someone else had the Reckless Youth name before. But when you mentioned that guys there, they basically had to use their regular name and then they got a gimmick. I feel like over here on the West Coast side of things, I don't know, maybe different promotions on the East Coast did this too. I felt like a lot of guys, when they just like graduated or were graduating and they were, starting to wrestle, they always got handed a gimmick that got handed to a bunch of different people. So like Big Time Wrestling had like 5 people named White Trash. That like
really,
yeah. So like a guy would be White Trash, and then eventually when he figured out his gimmick, he would become that gimmick. But or like there was like a Chicano Flame in All Pro Wrestling, and then like there was like Chicano Flame 2, Chicano Flame 3. SPW had like El Chupacabra, and then like another Chupacabra, and then like another Chupacabra. So like goodness. So like that I feel like maybe that was the West Coast thing then, because I felt like
maybe, and this might have just been a regional thing too. I mean, it's hard to know. I just know they were pretty rigid, and I know in the like that area, that New York to Delaware area, a lot of the guys just used their regular name, or they started out as their regular name, right? And they would eventually turn into a gimmick, and you might grab some people later that had a gimmick. But that was pretty old school. Like I said, when I was coming up, like I said, I go back to me, like I was training 93, 94, up until 95 when I debuted. And when I debuted, I had to be my regular name, tights, boots, all of that. It was a mess. And, the only reason that Reckless Youth thing ever happened is because I was out in the Midwest, and I had to go under an alias.
Yeah. And then most of the time too, the hand-me-down gimmicks over here involved wearing a hood of some kind. I think it's probably the lucha influence in California. So then then that way, when you eventually did have your own character, you wouldn't be recognizable from the person.
There you go.
Yeah.
Hood's hard. Hood's hard to work with. Hood is hard to work with.
I'm sure you had a lot of guys that you worked with, big names on indie shows, whether you worked with them or just on the same card as them. Were there any, WWF, WCW, ECW guys that thought they were bigger than the show, acted like they were bigger than the show, just really rubbed you the wrong way? Once again, you don't have to say names, but just moments where you're like, wow, this guy was kind of an asshole for no reason.
So when I was first coming up, they had the Fed was still lending out talent to shows. And so early on for me, there was this experience with like seeing some of these heroes come down, or legends or whatever come down, that otherwise we wouldn't be exposed to. And these are heroes. So my one friend who started out with me, Dave Keller, he looked a lot like Bob Backlund. And the one promoter had the money, and he was like, I think it would be funny to book you against Bob Backlund. And so he got Bob Backlund, and Backlund came in, and he was just really mean. He just wasn't nice. He was really mean. He just didn't seem like he wanted to be there. And I know he just really didn't care too much for the guy, for my friend Dave. And my friend Dave was like the biggest fan in the world. And like his heart was completely crushed, and he wanted to quit the business. Wow. After that. And that was tough. That was really tough. But I didn't have, me personally, I didn't have like a lot of like, I can't really recall like too many bad experiences. Like for me, there were a lot of like good experiences that, in my opinion, like I had with people that I don't think I should have really had. Right. So like I share with you that whole experience with Regal, right? Like Regal, I went for that first tryout, and he was really kind to me. And he didn't have to be. At the time that I was there too, Steve Austin was on top at that time. And I came back, and he was giving me pointers and talking to me and walking me through things and stuff like that. Like, just like, and in the rest of the place, like, nobody would talk to me at all. Like, who's this little kid? Right. And, so like, it was, some good experiences like that. I hear horror stories about some guys after some time, like if they get big and they get full of themselves. But I didn't really see that. Like, I mean, I even think of guys like AJ Styles, right? I haven't talked to AJ in a million years, right? But I can remember he used to walk around. I know he's a born again Christian, and at the time I wasn't. And I used to say, hey, how you doing? And he would always go around, and he would just be like, better than I deserve. Always such a really humble guy. I would hope that's still the case. Always very kind to everybody. And, just a reflection even of his Christianity, like in what he did and all. So, I had a lot of really, really good experiences with people that I don't think I really should have, right? Because I didn't fit the mold and stuff like that. And maybe it was because I wasn't too all intimidating to anybody. They're like, this guy isn't going to get a job, right? So like, in general, I didn't have a lot of bad experiences like that. But like I said, I do, that one haunts me, about my one friend, right?
Yeah.
And it haunts me because it just broke his heart, right? To like, it's Bob Backlund. And it just, and Backlund's like, this is another show, didn't really, and I know it was heartbreaking for him and all. I didn't really have that, I didn't really have those kind of experiences though myself. I like I said, I had some good experiences. Speaking of,
you were talking about the feedback that you got from like Austin or Regal. What was something that they told you, like a piece of advice or like feedback on your match or something that, like, in hindsight, you're like, oh, that's amazing. But like at the time you were like, I didn't even think of that as being like something I had to work on. Like, holy shit. Like I had no idea. Like, was there anything like a weird piece of advice that you got that you're like, that was never even in my mind, but it was like a great piece of advice basically?
So, I was mentored by Regal for a number of months. So I consumed a lot with him, and he led me around the ring. So I learned a lot from him there. But some of that early advice that I would get from some people would be so conflicting, right? So like 1 minute people would tell me to slow down, and then another minute they tell me to speed up, and then they tell me to interact with the crowd, and then they tell me not to interact with the crowd. Like, right. It was like, it felt like it was so confusing a lot of times weeding through some of that stuff. And the reality is like, maybe there was like, I slowed down too much when somebody told me I was too fast, and then I needed to speed up more. And, it was just hard. I knew the biggest thing was really to just gauge and feel out the audience. And probably some and I don't want to discount like Regal, like the advice that Regal gave me and some other great people, but Very early on, it took me a long time to figure this out, but very early on, Glenn Ruth, Headbanger Thrasher, was training me. And the biggest thing is trying to understand psychology. The hardest thing is psychology. He explained it because he was involved in construction, and he explained it from the standpoint of building a house. And he explained that analogy to me. And I'll tell you what, it took me years to really be able to make that a reality and begin to understand how to build that house. Right. Ultimately getting to the peak, of the roof where, going into the finish, right. False finishes and stuff like that. And on building the foundation and things like that. And so that was probably the best advice, but it took me a long time to understand it. After I got that advice, what I started to do is a lot of matches that I thought were good. What I would do is I would look for that formula in those matches. And then what I would try to do is just replicate those matches. Right. But I would just, insert my stuff into it or somebody else's stuff that I was working with. Right. But it took a long time for that. So probably one of the most lasting things really was just always around psychology, feeling out the crowd, understanding the crowd, looking at the temperature of the crowd. And even I used to watch a lot of other people's matches leading up to mine and even after mine to get feelers. Right. How do I even pace something next time I come back? Right. Or even leading up to my match, what's going on out here? How's the crowd responding? So it was stuff like that. And it was all because of that analogy about the house and trying to understand that, because when he painted that picture, he didn't just paint a picture from the standpoint of my match, that match. He also used that analogy to stretch it across the entire show. Right. And then then I was just it was kind of studying that and learning that and understanding that. And that concept took me a long time to really work out. And to that point, depending on the crowd, the place, whatever was going on, what was the pitch of the matches or the style of the show that I was on, I had to be conscious of all those kind of things.
That reminds me of, I got into a YouTube hole of watching video essays on screenwriting and stuff like that, because I'm big into movies. And that reminds me of when they say the movie has a 3-act structure, right? And they say but technically every scene also has a 3-act structure in those scenes that build up to the large. So that's what that reminds me of, where it's
yep.
Each section actually has the exact same structure in a smaller way. And I was like, that's so interesting to me. I don't know. But we've reached it. The final question. I call this the touchy-feely question of the podcast. It is your pure joy in wrestling. The moment before, during, or after a match. The part that you get goosebumps, where you're like, this is why I love wrestling. This is the thing that made me fall in love with wrestling.
Yeah, I think I told you, just my interactions with the fans are probably the biggest things during the match, right? I told you, I love working with kids. So working with kids was great. Working on shows with kids, right? And performing for them because they love the clear good guy and bad guy. And I love portraying that story. And I had no problem with making myself look like a fool as a heel. That it would just be eaten up. But even when you hook the crowd, there's a moment where you hook the crowd, right? And they're engaged in your story, right? I can watch Netflix and I can know within 5 minutes, right, if I want to continue to watch this story anymore or not, right? If I care about the story or not. They hook you at a point and then you want to see what's going to happen and how it rolls out. And to get people at that place, sometimes you don't necessarily know that place until you get to the false finishes, to see how committed they are to you. Sometimes in the turnaround you can catch them, but there's that place. And I've been fortunate enough to be at that place a number of times where something would happen and the crowd would pop and I would be laying next to the person I'm working with and I would be like, yeah, we got them. They're engaged. This is awesome. This is going to be great. And you might be 20 minutes in, 25 minutes in, 30 minutes in, and you might be exhausted. But that energy, like I was talking about earlier, all those all that sound coming at you, right? Like, and that electricity from that, like, it would just fuel you for the next 5-10 minutes as you're going into the finish. And I think about stuff like, I remember working different people, but like Matt Stryker in ROH. I had a great match with him where it was like, man, they were there with every bit of it. And we were just exchanging things, and they were just like eating it up. And those are the type of things that just like, oh man, it's just golden. It's just golden. You're like, oh man, they like my painting, right? Like, that's what we are. We're just starving artists trying to sell our paintings. And, and many times it's not until after we die that anybody even cares about the paintings, right? To some degree, we're all like Vincent Van Goghs, right? And so it is. And there's that point where you're kind of like, oh man, all of this work, the long drive, the little pay, the whatever, it is, when they engage in that way, you're like, that makes it all worth it. It doesn't matter that, I don't have gas money to get home, and, I'm going to be hungry, and I got a hot dog with relish, and I don't eat relish. And all it doesn't matter. And all, like I said, we're starving artists, and just trying to sell our paintings. And when people appreciate it, it's just like, that's really nice. And all, and I was really fortunate that people liked my work, and I'm flattered that they did, and that in some way it can still live on because of programs like yours, where you still want to relive me after 20 years. And I'm glad that I may have been in some way a catalyst or contributed to any of the wave that we see now. And so I'm really flattered that you would even ask me to be on this. And I know I sucked up an enormous amount of time on here. And
great.
I'm just flattered you would ask me. And I really appreciate that you even remember me. Coming out there to Cali, it was a lot of fun. And everybody was always really nice to me out there. And I always felt like I always felt like I was receiving more from the boys and from the fans than I ever really deserved. And that's just honest. Like, I just always felt like I was always getting more than I was given. And so it was hard to keep up with that sometimes. I felt like, oh man, like there's so much pressure here, and, because everybody's given me so much and all, and it was just so nice and all. So, thank you. I thank everybody, that was even, engaged or entertained, or maybe even not entertained by me, as well.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for being on. I appreciate it.